I have kept this quiet for 41 years. I want you to understand that before I say anything else. 41 years. I made a promise, and I am a man who keeps promises. That is the whole reason they put me in that uniform in the first place. So when I tell you that I am finally speaking, I need you to know it is not easy for me. My hands are shaking a little. You cannot see that on a recording, but they are. They told me the world would be better if it never knew. They told me it would protect him. And for a long time I believed them because I was young and because I loved him too. But he is gone now, and the men who gave me that order are gone too. And I am old, and I have started to forget small things, where I put my keys, the name of the street I grew up on. And I am afraid that if I wait any longer I will forget this as well. And this, of everything, must not be forgotten. So let me start at the beginning. You have probably never heard of Larenza. It is a small place, smaller than you would think a place so old could be. It sits up in the mountains, where the roads narrow and the air gets thin and cold even in summer. From the great square you can see 3 peaks, and in the mornings the clouds come down and sit between them like something resting. There is a cathedral there, gray stone, 600 years of gray stone, and it has bells that you can hear from the far villages when the wind is right. And there is a wall around the old part of the city, and inside that wall there was, in my day, one man that the whole world came to see. We called him the Holy Father. His name was Cyprian. I came to the guard when I was 19. I want to tell you it was some grand calling, that I dreamed of it as a boy. That would be a nicer story. The truth is my family had no money, and my uncle knew a man, and the guard fed you and clothed you and gave you a bed, and my mother cried, but she let me go. I remember the bus down from our valley. I remember I had one good shirt and I wore it, and it did not matter, because when I arrived they took it and gave me the uniform anyway. The uniform. People always ask about the uniform. It is not what you imagine. We were not the men in the bright stripes you see in the postcards. That is a different place, a different country. Ours was slate gray, the gray of the mountains, with silver at the collar and the cuffs, a short cape, a steel helmet, old-fashioned, a morion they called it, that sat heavy on your head and left a red line on your forehead by the end of a shift, and a halberd, a long pole with a blade, taller than a man. In the beginning I thought it was for show. I learned later it was not only for show. They trained us hard, not just the marching, though there was plenty of that. They trained us to stand. You do not know how difficult it is to stand until someone makes you do it for 6 hours in the cold, and you are not allowed to move your eyes, not allowed to shift your weight, not allowed to swallow when you want to. The older guards told us the trick. You breathe slow. You find a point far away and you give it to your mind, so your mind has somewhere to go while your body stays. I gave my mind to the 3rd peak, the one on the left, the sharp one. I still think of that peak sometimes when I cannot sleep. The captain in my day was a man named Brandt. Big man, gray mustache. He never raised his voice, and that was worse than if he had, because when Brandt was disappointed in you, you felt it in your stomach for a week. He said one thing on my first day that I have never forgotten. He walked down the line of us, all nervous boys, and he stopped and he said, "You are not here to be seen. You are here to be between. Between the Holy Father and the world. That was the whole of it. That was the job. Now I have to tell you about him, about Cyprian, because if you do not understand what kind of man he was, the rest of this will not mean anything to you. The first time I saw him up close, I nearly dropped my halberd. It was maybe my 3rd week. I had been given a post inside, not the outer walls, the inner courtyard, which was a small honor for someone so new. It was early, before the tourists, before the sun had cleared the peaks. The courtyard was empty and cold, and the fountain was making that sound fountains make when no one is there to cover it. And a door opened, an ordinary side door, and an old man came out in a plain white cassock with a shawl over his shoulders because of the cold, and he was carrying a little dish of something, and he was talking to the cats. There were cats in the courtyard. There are always cats. And the Holy Father, the man kings knelt to, the man whose face was on metals, was crouched down in the gray morning, feeding the cats, and murmuring to them like they were old friends who had been away. He saw me. I had frozen solid, more frozen than any training had ever made me. And he looked up and he smiled, and he had this way of smiling that made the lines around his eyes all move at once. And he said, very quietly, so as not to scare the cats, "They don't come for me because I'm holy, you know. They come because I have the fish." And then he winked. He winked at me, at a 19-year-old boy with a helmet too big for his head. I did not know what to do. You are not trained for that. I gave a little bow, more of a nod really, and he nodded back like we shared a secret, and he went on feeding his cats, and I stood there, and I felt something come loose in my chest that has never fully gone back into place. That was Cyprian. He was not what the paintings made him. The paintings made him stern. In life he was gentle in a way that made stern men uncomfortable. He knew everyone's name, not just the cardinals, the important men. He knew the woman who scrubbed the chapel floors. He knew her children's names. He knew the name of the old gardener's dog. There was a boy who delivered bread through the lower gate, and the Holy Father would sometimes be standing there waiting, just to ask the boy how his mother's cough was. The men around him did not always like this. I did not understand that at first. I was 19. I thought everyone loved him the way I was starting to love him, and I mean that in the way a young man loves an idea, a father he never quite had. But there were men in the palace, men in fine robes, men who ran things. The chamber we called their office. The chamber ran the money, the appointments, the schedules, the letters to foreign powers. They were not evil men. I want to be fair to them, even now, even after everything. They believed they were protecting something ancient and fragile. They believed the Holy Father was a symbol, and that a symbol must be kept clean and distant and untouchable, because that is how symbols keep their power. And Cyprian kept ruining it. He kept being a person. He kept touching the wrong hands. He kept going where he was not scheduled to go. I heard the chambermen talk about him once. They did not see me. I was standing my post in a corridor, and I had learned already to be furniture. Two of them walked past, and one said, "He'll get himself killed being kind to strangers." And the other one said something I did not fully hear, but the word manage was in it. Manage. Like he was a problem to be managed. I did not think much of it then. I wish I had. Because looking back now, from the far end of my life, I can see that everything that happened that terrible night, everything I am about to tell you, grew out of exactly that. Out of the difference between a man who wanted to be between the Holy Father and the world, and men who wanted to keep the Holy Father above the world. Let me tell you about the lower quarter. Inside the walls, Larenza was beautiful, the cathedral, the square, the palace with its courtyards and fountains. But the walls did not hold the whole city. Down the hill, outside the old gate, there was the lower quarter, narrow streets, houses leaning on each other like tired men, washing strung between windows. That was where the people lived who cooked our food and washed our floors and swept our steps, and then went home at night to somewhere the tourists never photographed. I knew it because I came from a place like it. When I had leave, I would sometimes walk down there, out of my uniform, just to be somewhere that smelled like cooking instead of incense and stone. There was a woman who sold bread rolls from a basket on a corner near the old gate, and she called me Soldier Boy, even though I never wore the uniform when I saw her, and she always gave me the roll that was a little burnt because she said the burnt ones had more soul. Her name was Marta. Remember her, she matters later. The Holy Father knew the lower quarter too. This was the thing the chamber could not stand. He knew it because he went there, not officially. There were no processions, no cameras. But everyone down the hill knew that sometimes, in the evening, an old man in a plain gray coat with the hood up would come quietly down through the old gate with one guard walking a few steps behind him, and he would sit in someone's kitchen, and he would hold a dying man's hand, and he would leave before anyone important knew he was gone. I know this because, eventually, I was the guard walking a few steps behind. Brant chose me for it. I never fully understood why. Maybe because I was young and had no family in the palace politics, no one to whisper to. Maybe because he saw the way I looked at the Holy Father and knew I would sooner die than let anything touch him. He pulled me aside one evening and he said, in that low voice of his, "The Father goes down the hill sometimes. When he does, you go with him. You tell no one, not the chamber, not the other men, not your mother. You understand me." I understood him, or I thought I did. I was so proud. God forgive me, I was proud. I thought I had been given the most important post in the whole guard. In a way I had. But I was too young to understand what it would cost me to have seen the things I was about to see. The evenings I walked with him down the hill were the best evenings of my life. He would talk to me, not down at me, to me. He would ask about my valley, about my mother, about whether I had a girl. I did not. I told him I did not have time, and he laughed and said, "No one ever has time. That is the whole trick of it. You have to be a little foolish about time or you never live at all." He would point at a star and tell me what the old shepherds in his own boyhood had called it. He was a boy from the mountains too, it turned out. That was our secret. Two boys from thin, cold air, one of us in gray, one of us in white, walking down a dark hill together to sit with the dying. And he was so unafraid. That was the thing that frightened me, if I am honest. He had no fear at all for himself. He would walk into a sick room where there was fever, plague talk, and he would sit right down on the edge of the bed and take the person's hand, and the chamber would have fainted if they had seen it. Once I tried, gently, to suggest that maybe he should not touch, that there was illness, and he looked at me with those eyes and he said, "Jakob, what do you think this is all for if not for this?" I had no answer. I still have no answer. I think he was right. I think he was the only one of all of us who actually understood what it was all for. The chamber found out about the walks eventually. Of course they did. You cannot keep a Holy Father secret in a city that's small forever. There was a meeting. I was not in it. I was furniture in the corridor outside as usual, but the door was thick and the voices still came through, and I heard enough. I heard them tell him it had to stop. I heard the words dignity of the office. I heard the word danger. And then I heard his voice, and it was still gentle. It was always gentle, but there was something underneath it I had never heard before, something like the mountain underneath the snow. He said, "You may schedule my days. You may not schedule my heart." And the walks did not stop. But something changed after that. The chamber began to watch him more closely. There were more men around him, men I did not know, men in plain clothes who were not guard but were something. The air in the palace got tighter. Brant's jaw was set harder than usual. He told me one night quietly to keep my eyes open. He would not say for what. And then came the winter of the great cold, and the night the bells went wrong. I will tell you about that night. I have been telling you all of this so that when I tell you about that night, you will understand it was not sudden. It had been coming for a long time, like weather you can feel in your knees before the sky shows it. But I am an old man, and my voice is tired, and my hands are still shaking, a little more now than when I began. So let me stop here and gather myself, and then I will tell you the rest, because the rest is the part I promised never to tell, and the rest is the part the world was never supposed to hear. The winter that year came early and came angry. I remember because the fountains froze. In all my years in the guard I had never seen the courtyard fountain freeze solid, but that year it did. The water caught mid-fall like it had been surprised. The cats disappeared. The Holy Father worried about them. He actually worried about the cats in the middle of everything else that was happening, and he had one of the kitchen boys put out a box lined with rags in a sheltered corner. That is the kind of man he was, right up to the end. Even that last week, with everything pressing down on him, he was thinking about where the cats would sleep. Because there was a great deal pressing down on him that week. There had been threats. I did not know the full shape of them. I was guard, not chamber, and they told me only what my post required. But I could feel it, the way you feel a storm behind the mountains. More strangers in the city, More men in plain clothes. The gates checked twice as often, Brant doubling the night watch and looking older by the day. There was talk of a group, angry men, men who hated what the sea stood for, or hated the men who ran it, or hated something. I never fully understood, and I am not sure they did either. Hate is often like that. It does not need a clear reason. It just needs somewhere to go. The chamber's answer was to close him in. More walls. Fewer people. No walks down the hill. For the first time, the walks actually did stop, because even Brant agreed it was too dangerous, and even the Holy Father, I think, could see the fear in the young guards' faces and did not want to add to it. But he was not at peace with it. I could see that. He stood at the high windows in the evenings, looking down the hill at the lights of the lower quarter, and he had the face of a man listening for something. And then, on the coldest night of that cold winter, the fire started in the lower quarter. I did not see it begin. No one did, really. There were 100 stories after, and I do not know which was true. A stove, a lamp. Something worse, some said, that it was set, that it was meant to draw men out, that it was a trap. I have gone back and forth on that all my life, and I still do not know. But I know how it looked from up on the wall where I was posted that night, wrapped in every layer I owned and still shaking with cold. It looked like a wound opening in the dark. A glow, low down the hill, that grew and grew, and then the first thread of smoke against the stars, and then more, and then the sound, that low roar a big fire makes, that you feel in your chest before you understand what it is. And then the bells started. That was the thing I will never forget. The bells. The cathedral had a code, old as the walls, one pattern for the hours, one for the mass, one for a death, and one rarely used for the city in danger. And someone up in the tower began to ring the danger pattern, wild and uneven, not the smooth ringing of the practice bellmen, but something ragged, panicked, a boy or an old man hauling on the ropes with no rhythm. The bells went wrong. They clashed and stumbled over each other. And in a city that had trusted those bells for 600 years, wrong bells were the most frightening sound in the world. The whole palace came awake. I want you to picture it because I lived it and I still can hardly believe it. The freezing dark, the fire growing down the hill, wrong bells hammering the air, men running, torches. Brant's voice somewhere below me, hard and fast, giving orders, sending men to the gates, to the walls, to the Holy Father's chambers most of all. Because in a night like that, the guard has one duty above every other duty, and that duty has a name, and the name is him. I was pulled off the wall and sent inward, to the inner court, to be between. And that is where I saw the thing that I promised, 41 years ago, that I would carry to my grave. The Holy Father was not in his chambers. I heard it before I saw it, the chamber men, and there were several of them, in a state I had never seen those cold, controlled men reach, hissing at each other in the corridor. Where is he? Where is he? Find him. And I understood, with a drop in my stomach like falling, that in all the chaos, in the running and the shouting and the wrong bells, the old man in white had done the thing they had spent that whole terrible week trying to prevent. He had gone down the hill, toward the fire, alone, an 80-year-old man in a plain gray coat, out a side door, down through the old gate, into the burning dark, because his people were down there, and he could not stand at a high window one more minute and only watch. I did not wait for orders. I have thought about this many times, whether I should have gone to Brant, whether I should have raised the alarm properly. But there was no time in me for thinking. There was only the certainty that he was out there, and I was supposed to be between him and the world, and I could not be between him and anything if I was standing in a warm corridor. So I went after him. I ran. Out the side door, down the frozen steps, through the old gate that stood open and unguarded in the confusion, and down into the lower quarter, into the smoke and the heat and the noise. It was chaos down there. I had walked those narrow streets a dozen times in the quiet dark, and now I did not recognize them. People everywhere, coughing, screaming names, dragging children and mattresses and whatever they could carry. The fire had taken a whole row of the leaning houses and was reaching for more, and the heat of it hit you like a wall from 30 steps away, and the smoke turned every torch and lamp into a smear. I lost my helmet somewhere. I do not even remember it coming off. I was shouting his name, which I had no right to do. A 19-year-old boy shouting for the Holy Father in the middle of a fire, and my voice was nothing in all that roar. And then I found him. He was exactly where I should have known he would be, not standing back at a safe distance, not being important. He was down on his knees in the frozen mud of a little side lane, in his plain gray coat that was already black with soot, and he was with a woman, and the woman was Marta. Marta from the bread basket, Marta of the burnt rolls with more soul. Her house was one of the ones on fire, and she had gone back in. Everyone told her not to, and she went back in anyway because, I learned this after, because her grandson was sleeping in the back room and no one had counted him in the panic. She had gone in through the smoke and she had found him and she had got him out, and it had cost her. When I reached them, she was down on the ground, burned along one whole side, barely breathing, and the little boy was crying and clinging to her, unhurt, and the Holy Father was kneeling in the mud holding her scorched hand in both of his and speaking to her, low and steady, the way I had heard him speak to the dying a dozen times on our quiet walks. He looked up when I skidded to a stop beside them. His face was streaked black, his white hair gray with ash, and his eyes were the calmest thing in that whole burning night. "Jakob," he said, as if we had run into each other in the courtyard, as if the world were not on fire. "Good, take the child." I took the child. The little boy, maybe 4 years old, wrapped his arms around my neck so tight I could feel his heartbeat against my throat, fast as a bird's. And it was in that moment, with the child on my hip and my other hand reaching down to help the Holy Father lift Marta, that I saw the beam come down. The house beside us, the burning one, gave a sound I have never heard before or since. A groan, deep and final, the sound of old wood deciding it has held long enough. And the front of it began to fall, not all at once. It leaned and then it came, a great burning section of the upper wall, straight down toward where the three of us were, the old man, the burned woman, and me with the child. I froze. I am not proud of it, but it is the truth. For half a second I froze, the way I froze in the courtyard the first time he winked at me, except this time freezing would have killed us all. The Holy Father did not freeze. He was 80 years old. He had a bad hip. I had watched him once climbing the palace stairs, and he moved faster than I have ever seen a young man move. He did not move away from the falling wall. He moved toward me, toward the child. He drove into us with his whole frail body, both arms out, and he shoved me and the boy sideways, out from under it, into the mud, and I felt the heat of the beam pass so close behind me that it singed the hair on the back of my neck, and I heard it hit the ground where we had been standing with a crash that I felt in my teeth. And when I got up, spitting mud, the child still somehow safe in my arms, the Holy Father was down. He had got us clear. He had not got himself clear. The edge of it had caught him. His leg, his side, his shoulder. I could not tell in the smoke and the dark, only that he was down in the mud, and his gray coat was torn and dark, and he was not moving the way a man moves who is only shaken. I have relived that moment 10,000 times. I relive it still. In my nightmares I am always half a second too slow, always frozen, always the one who should have taken that beam, because that was my whole purpose. That was the entire meaning of the gray uniform, to be between him and the world. And in the one moment it truly mattered, he was the one who put his body between the world and me. I got to him. I do not remember setting the child down, but I must have, because I had both hands on him. He was breathing. His eyes found mine. And even then, even broken in the mud with the fire roaring over us, do you know what he said to me? He did not cry out. He did not ask for help. He said, "Is the boy safe?" I said yes. I could barely get the word out. "Yes, Holy Father, the boy is safe." And he closed his eyes, and something in his face let go, some tension, and he said, so quietly I had to put my ear almost to his mouth to hear it over the fire. Then it was worth it. That is the sentence. That is the sentence the world was never meant to hear. Then it was worth it. An old man, the head of an ancient and powerful thing, lying broken in the freezing mud of the poorest lane in his city, and his last clear thought in that moment was not for his office, not for his dignity, not for the 600 years of gray stone up the hill. It was for a bread-seller's grandson whose name he did not even know. Other men reached us then. Guards, Brant among them, his face a mask of horror. They lifted the Holy Father. They carried Marta. They got us all out, up the hill, away from the fire, and the fire itself was finally beaten back before dawn, and the lower quarter, most of it, survived. But the Holy Father was badly hurt, and in the days that followed, as I stood my post outside his chambers with mud still under my fingernails and the smell of smoke that would not leave my skin, I began to understand that a second thing was happening, a quieter thing. And this second thing, in its own way, hurt me almost as much as the beam had hurt him. The chamber began to build a different story. The official account came together within days. I watched it happen. I was young and I had no power, and I watched grown men in fine robes decide what was true. In the official account, there was no reckless old man slipping out a side door against every order. There was no 80-year-old Holy Father on his knees in the mud of the lower quarter, holding a dying woman's hand. There was, instead, a Holy Father who had been grievously injured while the palace was defended, which was not a lie exactly, but was not the truth either. It let you imagine him inside the walls, safe, where a symbol belongs. Hurt by the general danger of a terrible night, not by his own stubborn, holy refusal to stay where he was put. And the fire itself was folded into the story of the threats. A dark night, a dangerous time, the sea under siege, the guard steadfast. All of that was true, but it left out the one thing that mattered most, the thing I had knelt in the mud and seen with my own eyes. They left out that he chose it. They left out that no one made him go down that hill, that the danger to him was not something that happened to him. It was something he ran toward on his bad hip in the cold, because a part of the city he loved was burning, and he could not do the thing they wanted, which was to sit up high and be a symbol, and let the small people burn out of sight. I did not understand, at first, why they would hide the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. It made no sense to me. If the world knew what he had done, that he had thrown his own body over a bread-seller's grandson, would they not love him even more? It was Brant who explained it to me. Brant, who was not a chamber man, who I think hated the whole thing as much as I did, but who was old enough and tired enough to understand it. He took me aside maybe a week after. My eyes must have shown what was in me, because he looked at me a long time before he spoke, and then he said quietly, "You want to know why?" I said yes. I said, "Captain, he was so brave. Why are they making it small?" And Brant said something I have carried for 41 years. He said, "Because if the world learns he did this once, it will expect him to do it always. And a man who is expected to run into every fire will not be allowed to grow old. They are not hiding his courage, boy. They are trying to keep him alive, a symbol they can protect, a shepherd who runs toward the wolves, that one they cannot protect at all." I did not agree with it. I want that on the record after all these years. I did not agree with it then, and I do not agree with it now. But I understood it. There is a difference between agreeing and understanding, and part of getting old is learning to hold both at once. And then they came to me, two of the chamber men and Brant with them, which I think was meant to soften it, and they told me gently that I had done well, that I had shown courage, that the Holy Father was alive in part because I had gone after him. And then they told me that what I had seen down the hill was never to be spoken of, not the side door, not Marta, not the beam, not the words he said in the mud, none of it, for the good of the sea, for his safety, for the story that must be kept clean. I was 19. They were the most powerful men I had ever stood near, and I would have said no. I think I was that angry, except that then they did the one thing that could actually silence me. They let me see him. They took me into the Holy Father where he lay recovering, bandaged, smaller in the great bed than he had ever seemed on our walks. And they left us alone. And he looked at me, and he smiled that smile with all the lines moving at once, though it clearly cost him, and he patted the edge of the bed for me to sit, the way he had sat on the edge of 100 dying strangers' beds. And he asked me, not the chamber, him. He said, Jakob, they have asked you to keep our night a secret. I said yes, Holy Father, and I said it with tears standing in my eyes because I was so full of the unfairness of it. And he took my hand, his hand was so thin, so light, and he said, I am going to ask you the same, but I want to tell you why, and then you will decide because you are a man now and men decide. And he told me. He said the chamber's reasons were the chamber's reasons and he did not much care about them, but he had a reason of his own. He said that if the world made a great story of that night of the brave Holy Father who threw himself over the child, then the child would grow up as the boy the Holy Father saved. His whole life a footnote to one famous night, photographed, pointed at. Marta, if she lived, would be the woman from the story. And the lower quarter would become a place people came to look at, instead of a place where people simply lived. I did not do it to be seen, he said. I have spent my whole life trying not to do things to be seen. Let the boy be a boy. Let it be ours. Let it be ours. And so I promised, not for the chamber, for him, because he asked and because I finally understood that the same thing that made him run down the hill was the thing that made him want it kept quiet. It was all the same thing. It was all that terrible tender refusal to make himself the center of anything. Marta lived. I should tell you that because I know you are wondering. She was burned and she carried the scars all her life, and she never sold bread on that corner again because her hand did not work the same. But she lived. And the Holy Father saw to it quietly that she and the boy were cared for not from the chamber's funds, not officially, but there was always somehow enough. I do not know all the ways he arranged it. He was better at quiet than anyone I have ever known. He lived 4 more years. His hip was never right again. He walked with a stick after that, and he made a joke of it, said the stick made him look wise. He never took the walks down the hill again, the chamber one that much, but he found other ways. He always found other ways. And when he finally died, an old man in his bed, the whole world mourned the gentle Holy Father, and not one of the thousands who wept in the great square knew what I knew, that he had been braver than any of them would ever be told. The little boy grew up. I kept my eye on him from a distance all my life. He never knew who I was. He grew up a boy in the lower quarter, then a young man, then a man with children of his own. An ordinary, happy, unremarkable life. Exactly what the Holy Father wanted for him. Let the boy be a boy. And he was. And that I have come to believe was the greatest gift Cyprian ever gave anyone, not the saving, but the silence after the saving. The refusal to let his own goodness become a burden on the person he had saved. So why am I speaking now? I have asked myself that these last weeks as I decided to do this. I made a promise. I keep my promises. That is who I am. But the boy is an old man now himself. Marta is long in her grave. The chamber men are dust. And Cyprian is gone 41 years, and the story they told the world, the clean and distant story, is the only one that remains. And I have come to feel that keeping it is no longer protecting anyone. It is only erasing him, the real him. The one who fed cats in the frozen morning and knew the gardener's dog's name and knelt in the mud with a bread seller and said, with a beam's weight crushing his old body, then it was worth it. I think a man like that should not be remembered only as a symbol. I think the world is poorer for not knowing what kind of shepherd it actually had, for those few years, up in the cold mountains, in the small place you had never heard of. So I am breaking my silence, not to expose anything shameful. There is nothing shameful in it. That is almost the whole point. The thing they buried was not a scandal. It was the most beautiful thing I ever saw. And I have decided in what is left of my life that beauty like that has a right to be remembered, even against a promise, even after all this time. He put his body between a child and the fire. He asked for nothing. He wanted the boy to simply grow up free. I was supposed to be the one who stood between him and the world. In the end, he was the one who stood between the world and me. I have carried that for 41 years. I set it down now. Gently. The way he set down everything, the way he set down his own life, one quiet kindness at a time, so that no one would notice the weight of what he was giving away. Rest now, Holy Father. I kept it as long as I could. Forgive me for finally letting the world see you. You were always braver than the story they told.